Okay. Well, my name is Janet Weiner, and I write historical novels. Live in a 500 to 600 year old chateau, which means castle, and that's why the whole thing is called the Huguenot Resistance series. Because in World War II, the Nazis came to our town down the same road. Oh, and did I mention they took over my house and used it as their headquarters? Many people that chose to stay pretended to be Catholic. So they converted, but they didn't have to die. I won't tell it all. It's all in the book.
Now, do your friends ever worry that if they annoy you, they'll end up as a villain in your next novel?
Not no one's admitted to such.
All right. Hey, Janet. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Janet?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good. I'm glad we reconnected again recently. I guess you were checking out some of the videos I just put out recently.
Yeah, so good. Yes, I was. And
The
I'll, I,
Dr. Jacob Alley's video with the great books and
yes,
study the great
yeah,
books is a friend of mine, and so you had
it
reached
was
out to
so
me and
good.
said you appreciated it and liked it, so then that sparked the
Yeah.
conversation to get you back on the show. So Janet, would you please introduce yourself and what do you do for a living?
Okay. Well, my name is Janet Weiner, and I write historical novels. I've been many things, a mom of four kids, grandma of four grandchildren. And I have been a missionary with my husband for almost the entirety of our marriage, which is 47 years. And yeah, and we live in France, and I can maybe go into more of that later, but in the last several years, I've been writing historical fiction based on where we live in France.
So Janet, I love the book that you put out, the initial one, and now since then you've wrote two more. But what's the
Yeah.
best place to get a hold of you, and where can we find you?
My website is the best place to start. So I think if you go there, not I think Sean's going to put up the information, and if you go there, you'll find a link to my books. It'll have the latest book up, but it'll take you, if you click on that, you'll on the book, you'll go to other books, and a button that'll take you to where you can buy it. And it also has my blog. I write a monthly blog on life and beauty and in the south of France. And a little bit of my travels as well. And then from there, you can stay in contact. You can put your information and you're on my mailing list. And I send once a month, send a newsletter, and about once a month post a blog. So that's how we could stay in touch. And I
Great,
would love
that's
to hear from
easy.
you.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love it, and the
supposed to
interaction is
be.
important, isn't it? When you do
Oh, I
connect
love
with
it.
some of the readers and the people that follow you, and then you're pretty
Mhm.
active that way, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
I love
I
it.
love it. It's
And so, if
encouraging.
somebody did have questions, is there an email that would be the best place to get a hold of you too? What would be the
Yes,
email?
you can get a hold of me at janetjowanouweiner.com.
I'll post that here for people to see. You can check that out
Okay.
and get a hold of you. And would Facebook be better than Instagram or TikTok, or
They're
where are you at?
equal. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So
Okay,
either of
good.
I'm on Pinterest too. I've been doing some fun things on there. So I think it's Janet JW, but Sean will probably put these things. Yeah.
Check it so people can check it out. All right, Janet. So here's the big question: what have you been up to since the last I got a hold of you and talked to you?
Yeah, I know. I don't know how the time slipped away, but since we last talked, I had just got, my first book had just come out, and since then, as you mentioned, I've written two more, and they're all three part of the Huguenot Resistance series. And for those that don't know, the Huguenot, or in America, we generally say the Huguenot, but since I live in France and everybody says Huguenot, I've somehow started saying Huguenot. So now that's stuck. So you can call them whatever you want. But the Huguenot Resistance series is a three book series they do have threads that run through them and you'll recognize characters, but I did also write them that you could read each one alone because sometimes you just find a book somewhere and it's, I you could read it, it's completely understandable on their own. But if you've read them in order, you'll go, oh, there's that person. Again, things like that. So the first one is called Though Darkness Descend, and that's what we talked about last time. And that is set in 1683, and that date is important because while it was still legal to be a Protestant in France, the Huguenot ended up being massively persecuted by the King Louis XIV. But at that time, it was still legal. 2 years later, after in 1685, it became illegal to be a Protestant, which caused a whole bunch of problems, obviously. But even when it was still legal, the king was persecuting the Huguenots. He was taking away their rights to meet. He made them tear down their big, beautiful church building. They kept meeting on the rubble, and there was a lot. He took away their rights to exercise certain professions, a midwife, lawyer, doctor. They were really limited, and judges were really limited and had to have a Catholic counterpart there to make sure that they didn't do something heretical. And I need to back up and say, first of all, I am so not anti-Catholic. That is the last thing I am. This is a historical um, issue. It is at the time the Protestants believed that the Catholics were heretics, and the Catholics believed that the Protestants were, which I can understand, especially from the Catholic point of view, because there'd only ever been the Catholic Church in the Western world and in Europe, and in terms of the Christian Church, it was the original church. And so then all of a sudden there's this whole group saying, no, we're going to there was no other denominations. Now we just live with all kinds of denominations and non-denominations. And so it's not foreign to us. To them, it was literally unheard of. And the Protestants, probably most people will know, believed that they could pray to God directly without a priest. They could read the Bible for themselves. They had pastors and preachers, and they were very faithful to go to church and be taught as well. But they also believed they could read their own Bible at home, and much as many of us would do today, and instruct their families and in their own lives. So they took a lot of personal responsibility for their faith, and all that was just in a big clash with Catholicism. And in the end, they had to either die for their faith or convert or flee the country or be put in prison or in the galley boats in the Marseille harbor to row until they died. So the pastors were killed publicly and horrifically if they didn't recant and become Catholic. And today, that wouldn't be that kind of issue. It's more if we were forced to become another whole religion, such as Islam or something, we might have that kind of reaction where we'd go, no, that is completely not my belief. So I just want to underline that because today I wouldn't, if someone said you have to be a Catholic or die, I'd say, okay, I'll be a Catholic. That wouldn't be that kind of issue for me, but it was for them at that time because of the context. So, but because of that, they were very faithful people, the Huguenots. Many of them died for their faith. That for them to not continue in their Protestant faith was the same as turning away from the Lord altogether. So, and they were so young. Most of the ones that died were young, young, young in their 20s. And so it's a tragic story in many ways, but it's an inspiring
I
story
do
too. And I
find that
believe,
interesting.
yeah,
I
yeah.
find it interesting because I have a degree in church history and stuff and theological
Mm,
historical. So, in studying from Martin Luther all the way to modern era. And I want to bring up something real quick before you go any further. Is you're so well versed in all this and the knowledge that you've gained over the last few years, but I feel like there's something we need to talk about. That maybe one of the reasons why you're so well versed in it is where you're situated right now.
yes,
And if I
yes.
do remember correctly from our last interview, you were finding like historical documents in towns and
Mhm,
different places that you're in that
mhm,
helped, I think, grow your knowledge and your understanding.
mhm.
And it sounds like it even grew your empathy towards
Yeah.
these people. So why don't you explain to people physically where you're at, why you're there, and how that helps you because of this research you've been able to do in this area.
Yeah, great connection. I live in a 500 to 600 year old chateau, which means castle, but it's not a fairy tale kind of castle. It's a crumbly old big building with roof issues and plumbing issues, and but we love it and we're really grateful for it. And our ministry, we work with Youth with a Mission, my husband and I, and and we started a Youth with a Mission center here. And through an amazing miracle, which is another whole story, the Lord gave us the money to buy the for Youth with the Mission, the 3/4 of the chateau, like the front and the two side wings. And then through another miracle, he gave us the money, my husband and I, to buy the back wing. So, and they used to all connect, but now they're all separate. Over the years, they were separated and sold. There were three different owners, and now there's just the two owners. Our ministry owns two parts and we own one part, and it works great because we're next door, but we also all have, we have our privacy too. And but when we moved here, this building's fascinating, and it's the only building like this in our town. And I love history. I was a history major at UCLA, and so was my husband. That's where we met. And so he did more church history. I did more American history, but here I am. But I just love when I'm anywhere, I'm interested in what went before. And then here I am living in this historical building. So I started doing research, and the things I found were crazy and so interesting. And they became the three books, essentially. I mean, they gave me the impetus. I'd always wanted to write, but I'd never really fully admitted it to myself. But then they gave me the impetus to develop a story around the really interesting things that had already happened.
What type of
So
documents are you talking about? Talk about those for a minute. 'Cause I believe you mentioned it in the last interview. Aren't they like historical documents you found in towns
yeah,
and censuses and all that kind of thing? I think last
yes,
time. So
yeah, good
talk about that for a
memory.
minute. Yeah.
That's amazing. You remember that from good job. Yes, I went to the archives in the town of Nîmes, and that was fascinating. And first of all, that they let me touch the documents. I didn't even have gloves on or anything. I had to fill out forms, and I had to have a special card in a locker where I left things. So there was some protocol, but then in the end, they just gave me a box full of the documents I wanted. And I'm like picking up these ancient documents. I'm like, they did sit me kind of near the main person who, I thought in case, I turned into a terrible person and damaged them or something. And they were very thick and written like with an ink pen dipped, you could tell, uneven writing. It was beautiful. I couldn't hardly read them though. I could hardly read them because of the paper quality. It was that thick, almost like homemade paper. It's like, and then the writing. Plus, it was in Old French, which is the equivalent of Old English. So it was like reading Shakespeare. And you know how if you read some Shakespeare, you're like, okay, I got about every third word, and you might get the gist, but sometimes you don't even get the gist because it's so different, if you don't know what they're talking about. So in this, I couldn't get it. And but that was really fun. That was a fun experience. That did not help me though. But thank the Lord, I don't even know how I found that some man type those all up and put them online. So at genianet.com or .org, I just kept playing around online, like as one does, and landed there. And then I could put in like my town and the dates I was looking for, and then the documents would come up. And once they were typed, even with the old French, I could make much more sense. At least I could read them, and I could make more sense of them. And I started, and they were, as you said, like family well, it would be like marriages, deaths, and then wills, like and then also disputes. And so then in through those kind of documents, so you can see who owns what and who inherited what, and then you could start piecing together families. And so that took a long time, but it was kind of fascinating too. And I just started making notes and things, and then I started piecing together stories like, oh, these people were here, but then they were gone and their property went to somebody else. So I guess they had to flee because they were, like you could, some stuff wasn't written, but you could read between the lines. And then of course I was going to be writing fiction, so I could invent those in between the line things. And I wasn't trying to write an actual history to prove something that would not interest me, nor be I wouldn't have the expertise or the platform to do that in France. There are people who do that sort of that are French that do that, so and who are more trained than I am. So, but I also saw some really interesting parallels from other documents and things I found online as well. That in that early period in 1683, and it's the subject of the first book, Louis XIV sent 1,200 dragoon soldiers to our town and to our region, but they came specifically to our town. Our town then and now has 4,000 maximum people. If you came here, you'd go, really? It seems like less, because it does. It's a very small town and has that kind of feel. But at the time, they were almost all Protestant, and they were so stubborn. Like he'd already made them earlier tear down their church, their big, huge, they call it a temple, is what the Protestants call it. They still do today. And like Jewish people go to worship in a synagogue. So the Protestants worship in a temple and Catholics worship in a church. So anyway, they had to tear down their temple. And then they just kept meeting despite everything. He kept trying to repress them and they just kept working around it. So he sent 1,200 dragoon soldiers, which are mounted cavalry, to our town to force people to become Catholic. And only 180 did, which is remarkable out of 4,000. And so the rest either had to flee the country, and many Huguenot went all over the world. And maybe some people listening will go, yeah, my ancestor, they went to the United States, especially like South Carolina and a few other, like Charleston, South Carolina. And I think I'm blanking right now, but some other specific place, Florida. I think there's a place in Florida. A lot of them went. Um, and of course, then they spread out from there. And there's a lot that went to London, and a lot went to Switzerland and Germany, and anywhere where there was a lot of Protestants that would welcome them. And wherever they went, they blessed those countries. South Africa. So South Africa, they took their winemaking. To London, they took business, military, fabric, and all their knowledge, because they were very prosperous, because they worked hard, because of the Protestant work ethic and that personal responsibility. And they were trained, they were intelligent, because they could read, because they taught, the Protestants made sure everybody, all their families knew how to read, because they had to read the Bible. And so, but then that, of course, if you know how to read, then you can be educated. It leads to all kinds of good things, like reading the great books. So, and of course, reading the greatest book, the Bible, and all of it. So they took to Switzerland clockmaking. They took, everywhere they went, they blessed these countries, and some of those countries are now known for those things. And it was a brain drain on France, so it was quite sad, really. But then many chose to stay, and in my region, the Cévennes, many chose to stay because it was a poorer region. They to travel and flee, you had to have some money to get on a ship, or they had to get out to the coast, but then get on a ship and go somewhere and start over. Most of them had some kind of means with them. So, but in our region, not a lot fled, not a lot. It's called abjure, like they forswore their faith. So they were sent. The men were sent to row, as I already said, in the galleys. That took 2 years, and then they would die. Like they'd be there chained to the galley for 2 years, and they mostly died within 2 years, and because they never were out of the boat. And women were sent to prisons. There's a famous prisoner, Marie Durand, who was in prison from the age of 19 for 38 years. All she had to do was become Catholic, and she'd be out of there. But she was there, and with many other women, and women were freezing, and it's just, I've been to that prison, and it's incredible. I'm going actually to her house this Sunday, and there's a whole day, and I get to go and be part of it and sign books and stuff. And she famously scratched in the prison floor, and you can still see it today, résister, so to resist. And later in World War II, they were inspired by her, and that's why they called themselves the Resistance. So it all connects. So my books start at the beginning and then end up my third. So I've written a second book. And then the third book, I'll tell you in a minute, but the third book is in World War II, and it includes the resistance. And that's why the whole thing is called the Huguenot Resistance series, because in World War II, the Nazis came to our town down the same road. Oh, and did I mention they took over my house and used it as their headquarters?
That's
Yeah,
incredible. Holy
I
cow.
know. So, fiction is stranger than reality. When I was finding these stories back to the beginning of, I just was writing things down, and I was seeing parallels. Dragoon soldiers down the same road in the same house did many of the same terrible actions in town. Nazis later down the same road in the same house, same similar terrible actions. I was even mixing up the stories when I was researching. I'm like, no, wait, that was the 17th century. This is the 20th. But it was I just felt like I didn't feel like there are a lot of parallels, and that was fascinating. And then the
I,
second book,
I
you
love, real
say
quick, I'm going to
something.
stop you right there for a
Yeah,
second
yeah.
because something I want to bring up is the physical aspect. I like sacred spaces, and it works
Mm,
like both ways too. Like there's
yeah.
spaces that have like this, like, I don't want to say
Mm-hmm.
negative or darkness to them, but they kind of do. And N.T. Wright talks about that if you ever listen to N.T. Wright.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that some places are soaked in prayer, and some places
Yeah.
have been soaked in turmoil, some places have been soaked in persecution, some places.
Mhm.
And here you are, not just reading stuff on the internet, which you're researching too through the internet, of course, but you're also out there physically walking around in these places, whether it's bridges or the house or the prison area. So you're
Mm-hmm.
bringing more to the table, than just,
Yeah. Yeah.
sitting on the internet and writing about things, or
Yeah.
making some things up. But so I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the way you are filling in some of the gaps with historical fiction is a little more interesting to me than maybe some other people that do it in their stories, because you're actually walking through these physical places, and you're soaking in some of this. So can you talk about that for a minute, being in some of these physical spaces and how that makes you feel? Or maybe it doesn't, I don't know, it's your
Oh,
experience, not
no,
mine.
100. It's a great question. I'm so glad you went there.
Yeah.
It very much does. And so, besides learning that history, we have felt both. We feel like this is a sacred space. And the way that God literally gave us $1 million to buy this place, like, and fix it up, like, and from an anonymous donor. That whole story is like mine. Every time we tell it, my husband and I go, it really
That's
was a
amazing.
miracle. And that we unsolicited, it's just a whole. So
What?
God went to, and so we own it. My husband and I do not own our part outright, but the ministry, but even that, we had enough money, we got inheritances that we didn't expect, and we were able to even buy it and pay it. We have a
Wow.
mortgage, but the rest, the part that the ministry owns, has no loan, and we just own it. And it's insane. And so it was so clear God wanted us here, and He made us wait years to get through all that process, and it's long, but He made it very clear that we were to be here, and made a way for us to be here and to stay here. And there has been a lot of spiritual warfare and a lot of spiritual cleaning up. So I think this is a spiritually active place. So I think there have been, like, there's been light and there's been darkness, and we feel like one of our jobs has been to pray and worship. Like, so we worship every day, in this, well, 5 days a week in the morning, and that's one of our practices. And or do a Bible study or do intercession, but we every day have something. But in the early, for several years, we literally sang, worshiped, and interceded as we worshiped for an hour every morning, at least an hour, because it was just what we had to do to bring. As we do that, we know that God's presence comes because we're worshiping Him. And so, yeah, so that has been a big assignment here. And now people come and go, oh, it's so peaceful, and and they connect with God and hear from God, really have, and things are brought to the surface here, and that can be good for them or hard for them. I mean, they can
Do
respond
you
well
have
or
any
not.
spaces where you felt like you shouldn't be there, or you didn't want to be there? You ever been to a space where you kind of felt like, I don't like what I'm getting out of this?
Yeah. Yeah, two things. Lots of spaces, yes, but the Lord keeps not so much here. I love my house and I love this land because it also came with a big, huge enclosed property. It's like 3 acres or something, and there's a watchtower in the back, and that all happened to come with my husband's in my house, but we just share it with the ministry because it's obviously more than we need. But um, so we love all of our land, but we've at different times sensed different things and just had to just worship and pray and invite the presence of Jesus everywhere. The light overcomes the darkness. That's why the light and the dark are such big. My books names are all have to do with light and dark, and that's where that comes from. But there is another watchtower here in this town that we do not own. It's around the corner, and it was built by the Dragoon soldiers, and it was part of when after the Dragoon soldiers came, they stayed and they built a fort, and that's why our town's now called Saint Hippolyte du Fort, Saint Hippolyte of the Fort. It wasn't called that before. And then there were rampart walls built, and this tower was one corner of it. And it was like a watchtower to watch people going in and out of town. And even a couple of years ago, a man whose family's from here and has always lived here, he said, normally walls are built to protect a population and keep an enemy out. These were built by the enemy to control the population. And he goes, it still marks us today. I'm just standing with my mouth open, listening to him. He goes, it's still in our spirit today. And I was like, oh, okay. And there's so much betrayal that went on and things that still, so there's a lot of that going on. So anyway, back to this tower. It's called the St. John Tower, Saint Jean. And the dragoons could be in it, and it's like a ground level and a next level and then a top level, and there was windows and they could watch and shoot. It was part of over the door of a main artery in and out of the town. And but the bottom of it, they used to sometimes use as a prison. The fort was used as a prison for Huguenots, and but the bottom of this one was as well. And sometimes the river that it's on would rise and they would just let them all drown. And I knew that. Even talking about it makes me feel ill. I went down in it. The guy that owned us let us. So I knew it, but when I went in it, I felt so ill. And at least we were with a group of us that worked together, and several of us had to just run out and stand outside. And I was like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. Another one was like, I have a headache. Like, it was so dark. And yes, we knew people lived there, but it was way beyond. I've been in other places where people have been killed. I went to England where Anne Boleyn's head was chopped off. It was really sad, but I didn't feel like that. This was just, it was gross. It was just, I can't, it was a visceral reaction. And so, yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I find that interesting. And then that also affects you in certain ways when you go to write about things, because you've actually physically been to some of these places, and it helps you envision, I think, what you're trying to write about and how people feel. So I want to encourage the viewers to check out your books because, like I said, you're not just writing these books from a research perspective. You're not just sitting in North America somewhere and looking everything up online and all that, but you're actually walking through these areas. You're experiencing things through this area, physically, spiritually, all that. So that you're bringing that to the table as a writer. So kudos to you. I want to encourage everybody to check out your books because you're bringing more to the table than just some head knowledge. You're bringing your heart too with it. So so with that being said, now let's dive into your 2 books that you've wrote since I last talked to you.
Yeah.
But without giving the whole story away, because we want the people to read the books. So
absolutely.
do your little, you can hold them up if you want to start with your second book. Yep, there you go. Get it in the middle a little bit. All right. And then why don't you just give us a little synopsis and encourage us why we should read it.
Okay. So this is called The Light. The first one was Though Darkness Descend. This one's The Light Shines Through. So I already told you about the first one. The second one takes place 17 years after the first one, and it's been illegal to be a Protestant for most of those years. And they have been severely repressed. I already mentioned the ways. But during that time, the church, many people that chose to stay pretended to be Catholic. So they converted, but they didn't have to die, which I really, this always raises a lot of questions. What would I do? Would I say no way and go to prison? Or would I pretend to be a Catholic and then do what they did? Especially if I had young children, that probably be what I tend towards, because if you had children, if so, say if my husband and I, it was when our children were young and we were at home, he would have been to the galleys, I would go to prison, and the children would have been sent to a convent at our expense to be re-educated. So you lost everything, and we should be ready to lose everything for Jesus. And I want to say I will always be ready to do that. But there was another, but there's also choices. Like you could pretend, and many did, and say that you'd become Catholic, and they had to send their kids to the local Catholic school because that was the only kind there was. And then at night, they would shut the curtains and pull the hidden Bibles because they weren't allowed to have Bibles. They were not allowed to have Bibles. They hid them in their special mirrors that had a back, these kind of thick mirrors, these wall mirrors. They pull out the family Bible and they re-educate their children at night. And they stayed true to how they believe they should interact with the Lord. And there's Protestantism exists in France today. It's a small percent, but it didn't die out, is my point. But during that time period, what's in the second book, there are three really interesting things happened. The church went underground. So they would meet in the forest, in caves, and and they called themselves the desert, the Church of the Desert, because they identified with the Israelites in the desert, or it was called the clandestine church. But if you were betrayed, someone in your town said, oh, they're meeting out there at midnight, and then the authorities came, then the pastor would be arrested and killed publicly, beaten on this wheel, torture thing, terribly, to death. And the men would go where, as I keep saying, to the galleys, and the women to the prison, and the children to the convents. So like if they were caught, that's what happened. So, but they kept meeting, and often they didn't even know where they were meeting. They were led by angels. They would see lights and they'd be led by the Spirit. All this supernatural stuff documented was happening. Even their enemies would document it. So I've read Catholic authorities that went in to disprove these things, and they're like, oh wait, I think that happened. They had to testify that they weren't all just making it up. So the underground church happened. Then also this very surprising what's called the prophetic movement broke out. All of a sudden, it started a couple hours north of here, but came all the way down. A 14-year-old shepherdess who was illiterate just started they called it prophesying, but what she was really doing was like what we'd call giving a sermon. It wasn't like telling the future, prophesying, or it was like the prophets of old in many ways, like repent, turn back to the Lord, your faith has grown lukewarm or cold. And she's 14, she's illiterate, she has no authority, and they still are pretty hierarchical, like you're not a pastor, you're not trained. She was illiterate. She only spoke the local dialect, but she would give these preachings in perfect French, which was like the king's language. And they made sense. They were logical and coherent. This is even the enemies wrote this. So anyway, that swept in. It mostly swept through the young people, and it made them on fire. They would go out in the street and preach for people to repent, and they'd get thrown in jail, and they didn't care. I mean, it was cool to read about, but not until like they're getting hung for it, when they're 19. But that's what was happening. So that there was the underground church, the prophetic movement, and then and sometimes it was even really, really little children. It was a very remarkable thing. And they threw them all in prison and brought doctors to check them and see if they were insane. And they're like, no, they're not insane, but we don't know what to do with them. And so the main character in book 2 has that gift, but she doesn't really want it. So and it starts in a church in a cave and goes from there. And then the third thing that happened was a lot of the young men rose up and decided to fight back against the oppression. But even how that happened, one of the main ones, he was just a wool carder. He like raised sheep and did things with wool to make it able to be used for fabric. He had a dream that became very significant to everybody, and It was about, I won't tell it all, it's all in the book, but he was a real person and he had a dream and they kept hearing from God. Like they were hearing audible voices, they were or having dreams or visions. And again, God would lead them all to go to this town, meet at this watering place at this town. And then the other people from the other town would come and all that of like mind. And then it was just a lot of supernatural involvement. They would be lost and God would send this big light and lead them. And animals did diversions when they're because they started fighting. It's so that's all in this book. I had to include at the end a whole thing called "Truth is Stranger Than Fiction" because, and one of my friends said, "I'm glad you did that because I thought you'd really gotten bizarre." Because she thought I went too far, and I'm like, no, I had to put that in because the weirdest things in the book were true. I wouldn't have dared. I wouldn't have written them. I would have thought people would never believe me, but I also didn't water them down, because it's like they happened. And there were things that were prophesied as somebody, one of the prophets is being killed and he says, this river will move. Well, guess what? It did, so just really, really, so God was intervening. It was a very crazy time. So that's what's in The Light
I
Shines.
love that you brought that up, Janet, because I've been confronted before by people and saying, well, the Bible's just written by old men to control people. And then I go, well, let me ask you something. I'm an old man now. But if I was to write the Bible, first off, it'd be like 10 pages at most. And second, it would
So
be
true.
all my disciples or whoever I chose to be the Messiah would never make a mistake. Like they wouldn't be on the third day fishing and scared for their life. They would have been at the tomb and they would have found it empty and they would have walked with Jesus and recognized him as,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
So
so
true.
instead of the
So true.
women finding him, the women finding, the empty tomb and coming to the disciples and then they don't believe the women. And, I mean, there's
Yeah.
so, like, the truth is stranger than fiction when you look back at, the miraculous things that happens, then, like, just taking the New Testament. I'm a New Testament guy
Yes.
with Greek. And so, like, Lazarus
Yeah.
rising from the grave, and all these things, like, he
You're
goes to
being
Beth-
broken out of jail
the
and
the pool of Bethesda, like why does he just heal one person and not all of them? There's a reason for all that type of stuff. That and yeah, you like Peter getting released from prison with the girl at the door.
yeah.
He's like being really, and like, why is there a girl at the door? Why didn't if I would have wrote these things, like things would have been a little more dry and it would have been like a 10-step, like the 10 Commandments would have been part one and part two would have been like the two greatest like commandments,
Right.
and then
Commandments.
part three would have been like believe and repent or something, repent and believe, and then be done with it. Like if I wrote it, but when God
Yeah.
intervenes, and He has His providence takes over, and His love and His and all His magnificence comes in, and His prevenient
Yeah.
grace that goes before, and how He works upon people's hearts, and and it's like I hear all these themes coming out of your stories and your research that you've not only written about, but the research you've experienced.
Mhm.
So I want to say kudos to you before. I just
Yeah.
want to intervene here for a second as we go
Yeah,
into,
no, it's good.
and now as we go into the book 3, give us a
Yeah.
synopsis about it and leave a little taste for us. So don't give away the hook
I
line.
won't. I won't. I could. It would take too long
Yeah.
to give it all away. But you're right. I will try to. So this is book 3 called Shining Bright, and as I said earlier, we jumped to World War II, and so there's some of the descendants of the people that were in the first 2 books, and I actually, it's based, the main character in this book was a woman who actually lived in the chateau at that time. And I know her cousin, who's 94 and is still alive and loves the Lord. And I just want to be like her when I'm 94, if I make it. She's
Amen.
just, and she's the one, the woman in my town, Madame Quentin, has told me about Janine, who lived here, who was a small person and had brittle bone disease, and so was confined to a wheelchair. And I knew some other things about her life. So between that and that the all that was going on in World War II and other things that I knew about that happened in this town in World War II, I put it all together. And so it it was a hard book to write because it's closer to home and the things, like, so the Nazis come and she's a disabled person and there's Jewish children being hidden and things. So again, um, it starts with once a year, the Protestants all gather at the museum, the Protestant museum that's here locally, that but it's one of the main ones for France, and have a big, huge worship service. Before COVID, it was up to 30,000 people. Now it's about 10,000, but still huge outdoor. And it's at one of the main characters from book two. It's in his whole house. He led the what they call the Camisard War, the uprising against the anyway, so it's there, but in book three opens with the service there that actually happened in September of 1942 when a bunch of pastors locally were helping. This isn't giving anything away, it happens right off the bat, but we're helping um, Jewish children that had escaped from camps or whose parents brought them to them and said, help take our children because we're getting deported. And so there were I think 30 Jewish children and teens and adults brought to the service, and the pastor said, we need to be good Samaritans and you need to do something. And it was the first time that, and he was also the head of the whole Protestantism in France, and he was a very good man and a very influential man, and for good. And there were no children left, or no, everybody was taken home.
Wow.
And so that's where the book starts.
So when
And
it does, is there
that
going to be a
part's
fourth
true.
part to this? Is there going to be like another part to this, continuing from this third part?
No, no, I finished all of World War II in this one. It's a little bit thicker, just because and the Nazis did come to our town and things happened. And so and there were a lot of people, and I've met people who were alive then and saw things. And so I had a lot of personal, I mean, the Lord just kept having me meet people that would tell me things. And I was like, oh. And the other day, even since I wrote it, one of the main secondary characters, I was talking to an older woman here, and she goes, oh, yeah, that guy was my cousin. Okay. Okay. The other night, my husband and I just looked at each other. We're just like, okay. And then she goes, and this happened and that happened. And I'm like, oh, well, good. I got it right then, because what she said matched what my research said and what's in the book. But and I'm being purposely vague, but he's becomes a really endearing character in the book. But there is a possibility of a fourth book, but it would be a prequel, because before all this, there was an earlier round right after the Protestantism came to France, and the chateau had a knight that lived in it who became a Protestant, but things happened. So I'm taking a
Wow.
little break. I've done these three. I'm going to do some other kind of writing for a while, and then I'll maybe go back to that, because it is, I love the research, but I need a little brain break, you know? So, yeah,
Here's something,
from the head.
Janet. Somebody
Yeah.
might be watching this on Substack, portion of this video or clip, and they're interested in writing, and maybe they've stepped into it and they're not sure what to do right now. Could you give a word of encouragement to somebody who's on the threshold of whether or not they should continue writing? Should they step forth into that gifting? And what kind of encouragement could you give somebody on that type of decision?
I love that question. I um, took a long time to come to write. You know, some people say they knew when they were little, they were always writing stories, things like that. That wasn't me. I was always reading a book, always. And so there was that. And I secretly, looking back, I was always wishing I could write books like the ones that I liked, but it never quite translated into, I want to be a writer. So um, I would encourage, if people want to write, to just write, just start writing, but not set out to write the novel or just write every day, write something. That I found a really helpful practice. Of course, we have our journals, and I think that's really good, and I still do that. I write more every morning. It's like a prayer. I pray, I write, I talk to the Lord, I just process things. It just gets a lot of stuff out. So there's that kind of writing, and I do it with a pen on paper. Some people do it on the computer, but there's something brain and hand and all that. So I find that helpful. And then I still read a lot, because it gives ideas. And then the more I write, when I read, I see things, I go, oh, that's such a good way to do that. Or, like physical descriptions can be so boring, but they can be so interesting. So like when I see somebody do it well and kind of seamlessly, I'm like, ugh, so good. I hate you. No, I don't hate you, but I'm envious, you know. But that's why reading's good because I'm not going to copy them, but I can learn from them and see how you can do things. So all that to say, if you don't write, the more you write, the more you can learn, if that makes sense. So for a while when I didn't know what to write, before I had the idea for these books, I was just writing a little, I forget, I set some kind of goal. And this I didn't do on the computer. Like I would write, let's say a half hour every day. And I would just pick a topic of something I found interesting. Like I remember writing one. Was watching the Gilmore Girls with my daughters who were home and teenagers at the time, and I think with one of them we were rewatching it. It had been a couple years, and we were rewatching them, and one of mine is called "Why I Like Lorelai," who's one of the main characters. Because as I watched it, I realized I like her, and I started thinking about why. Why do I like her? And it's because she speaks her mind. She's not afraid of what people think. Um, and I wrote it, and I've never edited it. I've never shown it to anybody, but it was fun to write. Like I remember that one. There's others that were my dad died during that period, so others have more heavier and deeper things. But I haven't even gone back and read those. But I just knew I needed to keep writing, or I wanted to write. I wanted to get better at writing, so I thought I'll just write, and nobody has to see that. Maybe someday I'll go read those and find something good and edit it and do something with it. But it was more like you have to run a lot to then run a marathon. That's putting it very simply, but you just don't go run a marathon. And writing a book is a marathon, and it is very much like a marathon. So I think that built up some muscles and things and reading. And
Now, are you ready for some questions? I think everybody
okay,
loves
I thought
quick
that might be
questions.
coming next. Yeah.
Yes, now that we've covered the books. All right, so I don't want you to think too much about these.
Okay. Okay.
Some of us who like to write and be creative and stuff, we want to, plan it out. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
want verse one, chorus one, two
Yeah.
bridges. No, 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 just shoot from the hip. All
Okay.
right,
Okay.
ready? All right, on a scale of 1 to I live in the archives now, how obsessed are you with historical research?
Ooh. Ah. Well, I'm going to put I live in the archives now as 10, and I would
Yep.
say I am probably 7. I
Ooh,
am
wow.
I'm not 6 if it's a subject that interests me.
Aha. All right, that's good. Fair enough. So, and you think has that grown now since your first book? Has that kind of increased?
No, no, in
Okay.
fact, it's probably decreased a little bit because at the beginning I was super thirsty and hungry for the information, and I've done so much. As I said, I'm taking a little break. I'm not burnt out or anything, but I'm not I've done, and each book then required a whole new set. Like I knew some of the main points, but then when you go to write it, you have to know much more in detail so that you're not making mistakes. So yeah.
All right, here we go. What's the
So I've kind of
strangest?
had my fill for a
What's the
while.
strangest or funniest misconception people have about Huguenots that you constantly find yourself correcting?
A lot of people don't know who they are. They either know and they say, "Oh yeah, I'm a descendant," or they don't know,
They just don't
or they.
know. So you find yourself educating people in general, right?
Yep.
Right. Who are the Huguenots? All right. Have you ever become so emotionally attached to a character that you started trying to negotiate with history not to kill them?
Yep.
Have you?
A little bit. A little bit. I didn't negotiate with history, but a character in my latest book, I was very attached to. And somebody else, a pre-reader, wrote and she said, "I loved your book, but I have a bone to pick with you in it." She goes, I'm like, I'm a historical.
And
Anyway,
on the part two of that question is, do your characters ever talk back to you in your head and refuse to follow the actual history?
a little bit, a little bit more. What happened? I love that. More what happens is in the first book, the main character's brother just kept running away, and I was like, I have to have him stop running away. Why does he keep running away? I mean, like I had him run away 3 times. So I'm like, this doesn't work as a story. Like I had to, but I left in a sum, and it became part of the plot. But I hadn't planned to have him run away. He just kept running away. So he wasn't talking, but he was acting out. Yeah.
I love it. And what's the strangest place you've ever had a brilliant idea, and did you manage to write it down in time?
Oh, yes, I have I do notes on my phone, but from what, so I usually, if I have a brilliant idea in some awkward place, then other than the shower, I can write it down. So yeah,
And so where's one of them been? Where's a strange place you've had something?
the
I
bathroom.
love it. That's funny.
Yeah,
It's like people singing melodies in the shower. They're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
whoa, that's a good melody.
Oh, it's good. Yeah, yeah,
And then they
yeah.
start talking to their Google. Hey, Google Home.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I mean,
funny.
that's why the phone is helpful to at least jot it down, you
That's
know.
funny. All right, be honest now. What's more terrifying, a blank page or a looming deadline?
Oh, looming deadline. Looming deadline.
So if you have a blank page,
I don't love a blank page, but as we already discussed, I've allowed myself to just start writing whatever and know I can change it, you know. And but a looming deadline, I don't like pressure. I
so I think
mean,
that I think the difference is here is that a blank page means it's under your control, and a
mhm,
deadline is somebody else putting the control on you.
nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you'd rather be okay. That makes sense. All right. Now, do your friends ever worry that if they annoy you, they'll end up as a villain in your next novel?
No one's admitted to such.
All right. Well, here's the last question. Have you ever met someone and secretly thought, "Oh, good, that's my next character right there"?
Um, Not directly, but bits, you know. Usually my characters end up being composites, you know, of people. You know, I think you know, some of the men in my books are a little bit of this relative and a little bit of that friend and a little, you know, so none of them end up being 100%, but sometimes, and especially here in town, and you know, I think, oh, you could have been so and so's.
I
You might
love
be a
it.
descendant of so and so, you know, because I'm living still in a town where people are descended. Like I said, this woman just goes, "Oh yeah, I was his cousin." This guy, you know, who's a character in my book,
That's
who's
amazing,
real.
Janet. I
Like,
love it. I love it so much. I think it's great. And then, do you have any aspects of your husband put in there? You're like, all right, this
mm,
guy, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you can't get away from it, can you?
No, you can't. You
Yeah.
can't. So the main guy character in the first book has certain aspects of him, and as I said, of other men too. The third book, there's a couple, and every time they started interacting, I was drawing on him a lot. And my husband likes me to read the book out loud to him when a new book comes out. He wants to hear it in my voice. And it's really
Oh.
interesting because I get choked up and emotional at places. Like don't I mean, I hope the reader would maybe. I don't think about it and try to make that happen. But when I'm writing it, I feel things. But when I say it, oh my gosh. But when I got to certain parts, I'm looking at him and he's looking at me, you know, like, and we both know why I had the husband act a certain way. And yes,
I
yeah.
love it. I love it. I know, right? It's always one of those
But you
things like,
draw on what you know,
yes, right,
how I,
exactly. It's like Taylor Swift or some of them people they end up writing songs about their ex boyfriends, you know, and
yeah,
it becomes their biggest hit, and like
right,
like, everybody's out there
right,
following these people. And then they go back to find out who's the boyfriend. What song is this about? This new album.
right.
Who should just break up with now? I don't follow her, but you know that's always like a
Yeah,
joke in the guitar world, you know. So I love it, but it works true for other forms of artistry. So even painting, I found out not too long ago one of the most famous paintings of the Virgin Mary in Italy was actually the guy's mistress. Was the
Oh,
face of Virgin Mary was his mistress in town. You know what I mean? And I won't give away all the story on that one, but you can look it up. And it's just like,
wow.
whoa, like okay, he didn't get too far away from his experiences. There, he's painting this
Oh, no.
famous painting of the Virgin Mary, and the face is
Right.
his mistress. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow. I know,
Yes.
right? It's pretty
So
crazy,
small.
isn't it?
Yeah, it
I
is.
know, right? I love it. So, but well, with that being said, Janet, and we're wrapping up again. What would be the best place to buy your books?
My books are on Amazon. So you can just, and they are on Amazon in different parts of the world as well, since I happen to just, I work in an international ministry, but probably most of your listeners are in America, but they're on good old Amazon.com. It's just the
Awesome.
easiest,
I love it.
especially since
Well,
I live in Europe. Yeah.
I love it. And so people get out there, buy our book, go on to Goodreads, set up a little thing for your progress so you can read through her books. And
Yeah.
I love going on Goodreads, and
I do
follow
too.
us on Substack and get on to Instagram, because if you're going to be on the social medias, you might as well be doing something interesting and something worthwhile. So don't
So
let the
true.
algorithm rule the day. Be proactive. Get on there.
And
Type in Janet's name. Type in the historical fiction. To make that algorithm work for you. So I want to encourage everybody to get out there and get it done. So
okay. Good word.
yeah, I'm used to coaching. You miss 100% of the shots you never take.
Okay.
So with that being said, Janet, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to hearing some more about the future work you're doing. So I appreciate you
Okay.
so much. Thank you for
Oh,
friendship.
thank you. Thank you for having me, Shawn. It's really a delight to talk to you. You ask great questions.
Great, thanks.